move on to Ms. Rigby's concern, because it is a concern to all of us, and that is planning coordination between DPZ and HCPSS to better align housing allocations and school capacity. And would you like to start, Ms. Rigby? Would you like to start us off, or would you, Mr. Brownell? I see that you're here. Is Ms. Gowan here? I guess she's not. Ms. Kamen, you're here. Thank you. Mr. Washington, you're staying with us. Okay.
I am. Ms. Kamen is with me on this issue, and Mr. Lubley as well.
All right. Joining us, but I will ask everybody to once again introduce themselves for the camera once you settle down.
I think just the general, if you could discuss briefly how you currently work together, how those projections are incorporated, so that way when we look at feasibility studies and we see that a school is projected to be at 110% capacity, but then we see that a development's coming out, I think one of the big things is that capacity, is that development included in those projections, and how do you guys work together to make sure that that's happening? I think that's probably a good starting place, and then we could dig down deeper.
And we'll start with introductions with you, Ms. Kamen.
Sure. I think we're still in the morning. Good morning. Renee Kamen, Manager of School Planning.
Good morning. Dan Lubley, Acting Director of Capital Planning and Construction.
It's my turn.
Yes, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Washington, you're going to participate on this panel, so.
I am. I
Okay.
am Scott Washington, Acting COO.
And I'm Jeff Brownell, Chief of the Research Division in the Department of Planning and Zoning.
Okay, and I thought that Ms. Rigby phrased the question extremely well, so I don't know who wants to start. Maybe Mr. Brownell, does somebody have a PowerPoint? Do you have a PowerPoint?
Yes, I do. So,
Oh, excellent. I love that.
we can try to see.
Yes, you'll have to move your head, Ms.
So, yes, I've coordinated this with Ms. Jones, and I appreciate Mrs. Jones posing these questions to us, so we were able to kind of come together and put together this presentation. It's a very complicated subject, so we thought it might be best to kind of start off with a presentation.
Okay, excellent. So this is a presentation from the Department of Planning and Zoning for those of you who are watching at home. And again, this is regarding housing allocations and school planning and how we can do a better job at making sure that our planning is in conjunction with the school district. And I know we have all been talking about this as we meet with the department, as the county council is meeting with the Department of Planning and Zoning to discuss the general plan. I think that we have all been, as council members, saying this is an area where we could really tackle this issue. Mr.
Right.
Brownell?
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion along these lines for several years now. So what I'm going to present is really an overview and a background of the history of this situation. And so first of all, I want to say that the DPZ Research Division and HCPSS Office of Planning, we've collaborated closely together since the year 2000. So we work very closely together every year moving forward. The initial data and projection model that was set up was jointly developed between Howard County Public School System and DPZ. And we've reviewed this. This model has been reviewed on a number of occasions by outside agencies or outside consultants. I think most recently there was a consultant that Howard County Public School System hired in 2019 and have reviewed this model. And based on this sort of review, we've always strived to improve the projection model. So today what I'd like to do is ask the specific question, which is APFO allocation areas and school district alignment. So how are the APFO allocation areas in the school district regions aligned, and why they and how they've changed over time, and how the projections are done as well. So a quick history. So as you know, APFO began in 1992, and in the APFO code, it basically says the purpose of the housing unit allocation concept is to achieve but not on the average exceed the general plan annual targets for residential completions, and in so doing, to provide an orderly and predictable planning environment for schools and public facilities. And then specifically, it says that the adequate school facilities test, which is now known as the open-close test or the school capacity test, should be linked with the housing unit allocation chart. And that's the question that's been posed to us. How is the allocations that we give out each year as part of the first test of APFO linked to the school test in the school regions? And so I'm going to give a little history. Sometimes you need to understand the history to find out why we are where we are, in particular where we're going. So I don't want to take a lot of time, but I just want to give an overview because there's been some confusion. I want to see how, I want to basically try to convey how things have changed over time and why we are where we are, where there is a disconnect between the allocation areas and the school regions. So initially in 1992, they were tied. So this is the very first allocation chart that was adopted, and there's the 6 school regions that you see there. They're the same 6 school regions that we have now, and they're tied to the allocations. So this is the allocation chart adopted by the county council back in 1992, and it coincides with the 6 school regions. And these are the elementary regions, by the way. This is a chart of those 6 school regions as they exist actually starting next year. So I don't have a copy of the 6 school regions that were created back in 1992. Remember, they're the same school regions, but now we have a lot more schools. So back in 1995, I think there was 30 schools, 30 elementary schools, and now there's 42. So there's been a 40% increase in elementary schools. And as those elementary schools were added, the region lines were adjusted. So the regions used to actually look pretty coherent, but now if you look at them, they're a little bit more less coherent, I guess you can say. So there's the Northeast, the Columbia East, Columbia West, Northern, Western, and the Southeast. That's the way those school regions look today. Every time there's a redistricting, keep in mind these regions, the borders change, because if you redistrict an elementary district, school district, then the border is going to change. So these have changed over time with every redistricting.
Sorry, could you go back just slightly? So is River Hill not included in Columbia?
Well, again, these are elementary regions.
Okay.
So
Is it Clarksville Elementary that's right? It's just hard to see from over here. No, the
Yes.
little school.
To the west, yeah.
Is it,
It does look, yeah, it's
okay.
Clarksville.
That's
Elementary.
Clarksville Elementary is the little blue there.
Is the little blue one?
Yeah,
Okay. I
exactly,
was just trying
yeah.
to orient myself.
Yeah,
so-
so these are elementary districts.
Okay.
Now, there are middle school regions and there are high school regions, but they've really never been considered in terms of APFO. When APFO was created back in the 90s, the concept was to align the allocations to the elementary regions. And there's an elementary region test, if you recall. So there's an elementary district test, an elementary region test, and a middle school district test.
Can I ask, why was that? Why just the elementaries? as
So
long
I
as
think
we're
in
on the
general,
topic?
so remember, there was no middle school test originally. There was just a elementary district test and an elementary region test. No middle school test in around 2003, I think. And then the high school test was even more recently added. So back when APFO began, it was just focusing on elementary schools. And the concept of having the development pass 2 tests, which is the region test and the district test, is the thinking that even if the elementary district was okay in terms of capacity, if the region as a whole within which that elementary school rested, and there's, back in 1992, there's probably 4 or 5 elementary districts within one elementary region. So if that region as a whole was over capacity, that even if you were to try to redistrict, you still couldn't accommodate the capacity issue. So it was a double test at the district level, and even if that wasn't open, then you would test at the wider regional level, and if that was over capacity, over 115% at the time, then that project, even though it was in an open district, still couldn't move forward because it wasn't a closed region. That was the concept of it. Now, the reality is the school system doesn't necessarily redistrict within a region. And so that's something to keep in mind. And that's one of the reasons why historically there was less of a connection and less of a need to kind of connect the regions to the allocations. Back in 1992, I think people were kind of thinking that we have to devise a plan and come up with a way to be able to, control for too much capacity in a certain region. That's why they came up with the region test. But the reality is, as I said, when the school system redistricts, they don't redistrict just within the region. If that. So basically, that's 1992, and then the allocation chart is based on the general plan, and the general plan is adopted every 10 years or so. So there was a general plan adopted in 1990, and then the 2000 general plan was adopted in 2000. And between, in the 90s, it was, this came up. Basically, it was realized that, well, this isn't really working so well as we kind of thought when the legislation is, because boundaries changed, and as boundaries changed with redistricting, it created a disconnect to the kind of the fixed projections that DPZ did with the regional boundaries. So a decision was made at that time that with the 2000 general plan, the county would adopt planning areas, which were a little different than the regions. I have a map of that in a second. And the intent is for those planning areas to have fixed projections. And it's also important to keep in mind that DPZ provides projections for a multitude of county agencies, Department of Parks and Recreation, Public Works. We work with the Baltimore Metropolitan Council closely to project population and housing units and employment for as part of road transportation planning. So we provide projections. So it's important for us to have fixed projections moving forward. One of the projections we also provide to the Howard County Public School System. So from a general plan perspective, the decision at the time was to come up with this planning area concept, which is this map. And it's basically 5 planning areas: Elk Ridge, Ellicott City, Columbia, Southeast, and the rural west. Now at the time, they corresponded pretty closely to the 6 school regions, elementary regions. Elk Ridge was the northeast, the north was Ellicott City, Columbia was split between east and west, and then there's the southeast, and then the rural west. So it was relatively close. So the decision was made, okay, we're going to have these fixed planning areas, and the allocations are going to be based on those fixed planning areas. And that's this chart. So this is the very first chart adopted for the allocation areas, and you can see the five areas: Columbia, Elk Ridge, Ellicott City, southeast, rural west. And there's something called the senior east at the bottom, which is for senior units. It was a set aside given for senior housing units at the time when the general plan was adopted. Yes.
This is going to be available to all of us?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we
all
can
right.
certainly make this
All
available.
right, this
Yeah.
is a very good presentation, so we appreciate all the effort you
Okay.
put into this. Yeah,
You're welcome.
thanks.
Thank you. I think it's important to go through the history to see where we are at the present. But then things got more complicated. So this, after the general plan 2000 was adopted, the chart was amended over time between 2000 and 2012, really, when the next general plan was adopted, which is the plan we're currently under, called Plan Howard 2030. So more allocation areas were added. There was a Route 1 set-aside was added. So an additional 250 units were added as part of that, because the general plan 2000, one of the policy items was we want to revitalize Route 1. And there was a recognition at the time that, well, how could we revitalize Route 1 if there's no allocations for Route 1? So the policymakers decided to set aside 250 units for the purposes of Route 1 revitalization. Now, the definition of Route 1 is everything east of I-95. And it corresponds to the community activity zones and the TOD, the transit-oriented development zone, really to allow for kind of mixed-use development along Route 1. And then following that, also some regulations were added to offer moderate income housing units. So the moderate income housing unit regulations have been increased over time progressively. And so again, 100 units set aside was allowed for moderate income housing units, which could be built pretty much anywhere in the eastern part of the county at the time. And then there was an incentive to allow for environmentally friendly projects. So a green neighborhood allocation set aside was added. So then we ended up with this chart at the end. And then 2010, downtown Columbia plan was approved. So we added a downtown Columbia revitalization allocation set aside. So that's how that evolved over time. Yes.
Why was the huge jump in 2015 and 2016? Because if you go back to another slide, it's around 2003. Now we got a
Right, that's primarily due to the rolling average, which if allocations aren't used in a certain area, then they get rolled into future years. So, right, and there is a bill that is going to change that because we're sort of in the same situation where we have a lot of allocations available. We don't want to end up to be in a situation where we have that many units occurring that quickly, so.
You-
But that's
You mentioned it when you were going with the little red lines, but can you say why the general plan works the way it does, where if you have a down year, it carries over? Like, what's the
Oh, yeah, right.
economic
Yeah, so going
reason?
back to the chart, at the very beginning, that was the text from the APFO code. It basically said the intent of the allocation chart is to meet and not exceed the general plan growth targets. So there's actually a chart in the general plan, and this is the chart in the general plan. But because the intent is to meet the general plan growth targets, if the allocations for 1 year don't meet those targets, there's a provision in the adequate public facilities ordinance called the rolling average, and you take those unused allocations and you roll them into the next 3 years. So you basically divide it by 3 and then put them into 3 years. What's happened because of that, and this chart, this particular chart is reflecting that, the number of allocations can build up if they're not used in certain areas. So then things even changed again. And this chart is the third chart, I guess, in the history of APFO. And this relates to the latest general plan that was adopted in 2012 called Plan Howard 2030. And at that time, there was a lot of discussion to implement these planning areas, which are known as designated place types. And this discussion really was around the working with the state, the Maryland Department of Planning, which recently in the late 2000s and the early 2000s created these smart growth laws, a whole collection of laws. And they recommended the planning departments and counties across the state to implement with their general plan these designated place types. So Howard County did, and I think we were the first, and I think we might have been the only one who actually did that. But we, for better or for worse, we did. And the intent is to basically come up with these designated place types to plan for smart growth. So for example, in this case, in Howard County's case, we have these growth and revitalization areas, which is the sort of pink color. That's really intended to be where do we want to revitalize and redevelop and grow? Smart growth. We want to put growth in areas where there's adequate infrastructure and transportation. So those pink areas are really areas that are along the Route 1 corridor where we have higher density mixed use zones like CAC and TOD, as well as the Columbia Village centers that allows for the intent is to have redevelopment opportunities along the Route 440 corridor. And at the time, it was Maple Lawn and Emerson. So you see that in the southeast. So that's the pink areas. And because the intent was to have those be revitalization areas, we gave more allocation to those areas. And I'll show you the chart coming up next. You'll see how many were allocated. The brown area is the established community area. And that's sort of considered the area where there's room for growth, but it's more infill and it's less intensive development. It might be some R20 land that hasn't been developed yet and things like that. And then the rural west is everything west of the planned service area line. So those are really the three main areas. And then we also kept the green neighborhood as an incentive pool, which really can be anywhere in the east. And then we kept downtown Columbia. So it reduced it from all those different complicated areas to sort of these four main areas. But of course, by doing that, you got away from the whole concept of having these align with the school regions, right? And again, DPZ, when we adopt this chart, we have to come up with a general plan that is good for the whole county. Smart growth, planning for infrastructure, DPW, roads, water, sewer, rec and parks, and all of that. So that really was the focus of that general plan. How do we grow further? So I did want to say that, so we're away from this sort of concept, and in the meantime, we've gotten more sophisticated with our projections, and I'll talk about that in a second. I have some examples of how detailed our projections are. So there really isn't an issue with us not having good projections because they don't align with the allocation areas. Since we track things at the parcel level and lot level, and we know where everything is going forward, we're able to project pretty well, not perfectly, but pretty well housing units, and we give those to the Howard County Public School System. We've been doing that for many years. The details of where on the ground future development is going as soon as we get that information. Now, having said that, there still is probably merit, and this is the third bullet point, there's probably still merit to, and I could see the value of having smaller allocation areas, kind of going back to the original intent, because it caps, right? So I just want to make that clear. Just because our allocation areas don't necessarily align with the school regions, doesn't mean that the projections are not known or are inaccurate, because we have all the detailed data. But I could see how it would provide value as a cap, because basically if you have a certain school region and you have a certain capacity in that region, then you could come up with some kind of system in a small area where you have limited numbers of allocations in that area. So you see the distinction between that? So there is value in that, and it could be done. You know, things can be changed. It could be done with the next general plan. It could be done an amendment with the current general plan. So what we would recommend, though, is really it occurs with the next general plan, and there's a number of reasons for that. I think APFO is going to change anyways, considerably, with the next general plan, because the county is changing considerably. The next general plan is going to be more of a focus of a redevelopment type of county, and there might be small area plans. There's not a lot of areas left in the county where there is growth that will occur. There are certain areas, but we know those areas, and so perhaps the next sort of way the general plan can be done is small area planning, where you could do something like, we're going to redevelop a certain area, but we're going to have to set aside school sites because we know the growth is coming. Those kinds of things. So what we're recommending is that just because it's out of alignment now doesn't mean we don't have good projections, and that there is value in it because it can place a cap, and maybe perhaps moving forward there's a way to come up with a system that puts that cap back or some other kind of form that we don't know. But through the general plan process, the hope is to come up with something better. So that's kind of the history of it and why things are out of line. And again, I want to emphasize, just because the regions are out of line doesn't mean that the projections, we don't do our best to do accurate projections and we're missing things. We try to capture everything we can. To go over the projections themselves and how they're done. So the system is pretty detailed. We track things in our land use database as soon as plans come in the door. So when a sketch plan comes in, we know where that plan is and we know the units. And then we have these various stages. So we've talked about before the various stages of the planning. We track it as it goes through preliminary plan stage and final plan and site development plan. And then we get the building permits from the Department of Inspections, licenses, and the permits, so we know when the units are permitted. And then we know when they're built. So it's real time. As plans move through these stages, we have staff in my division that tracks these, and it's updated, real time, weekly. Now that's sort of the easy stuff because we know the plans we see the plans. The hard stuff is how do you project the future, and the way we do that is, and it's the longer term projections that are probably years 8, 10, 11, all the way through year 20. We do 30-year projections. Under the current 30-year projection, we actually run out of land before the 30 years. The school system relies on the first 10 years. Most of that first 10 years really is things that we know that are in the pipeline, projects that we know of. For the further out projects, it's very important to try to think about those because it is our capacity, right? So at some point, for example, if for example, a junkyard on Route 1 at Zone CAC, if they decide to redevelop, we would add capacity there. So we come up with estimates of capacity. But that's, again, that's a guess. It's anyone's guess of when they're going to happen, but we do know what the ultimate capacity is in the county based on current zoning, only based on current zoning, not based on speculative zoning or what could happen, but based on current zoning, we come up with those capacities. And again, those are on the outer years. Yes?
Because zoning keeps changing for one property,
Right.
how do you encourage that?
So when
Compare that to schools.
yeah, so whenever the zoning does change, and it does happen, it's called piecemeal zoning. It does happen from time to time, not very often, but it does happen from time to time. We would add that capacity to our projection model.
May I? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you asked that, Dr. Wu, because that is an important distinction to make, is that all these projections that you are making in DPZ, you account for that new development the second the plan rolls in. But in the case of properties that aren't zoned to accommodate residential or beyond a certain number of residential, we're not accounting for them at all. So for example, a junkyard on Route 1 right now, there is no built-in capacity in our schools because we haven't been projecting for residential in that application, right?
Well, there's a distinction between that. So because the example I gave was, I'm assuming that junkyard has CAC overlaid on top of it, which is by right the ability to redevelop that as a corridor activity center, which includes residential units. So we do include the capacity for all CAC projects and all TOD projects in the Route 1 corridor. The difficulty is that we don't know when that's going to happen, so we sort of project those in out years.
Okay.
Yeah, but if it's an example of a CEF project, which is an overlay floating zone, community enhancement zone, we don't know where that's going to happen. Like the Roberts property, for example, we didn't assume that units would be there because the zoning wasn't there.
They did have CAC.
They did.
Oh, is it I thought that was CEF.
Ultimately.
Okay, so then we would have the CAC. We would have the CAC numbers, but not the CEF numbers.
It was a CAC and it had a strip of B1, which is why it
Okay.
came before us, because in order to convert that B1 to have the CEF, that's why, well, not us
Okay.
in this hat, but us
Yeah.
in the other hat.
Okay.
So it had CAC.
Okay, so we would have had the CAC sort of added capacity units in there, but not the CEF units. Like, we didn't have the Simpson Mills CEF until that actually happened.
So how about Clarksville, Erickson living, like senior living, right?
So-
For example, they're now converting the zoning, right? That's a
Right.
huge development. Do you have a model, for example, to say, okay, how many new capacity were increased to the school? For example, maybe seniors were living their current living, right? They moved to the senior living. That empties their house. That will draw more students coming to the school system.
Right.
So do you have a model to model that? So
No.
how many new students were created because that
Yeah.
senior living?
We don't have a model to model that, but that's a very unique project, and it's a very important example. It's a lot of age-restricted units, and so because it doesn't have the zoning yet, we don't include it in our projections.
But that wasn't Dr. Wu's
But we-
question.
we-
His
okay.
question was, what about all the older citizens who, this, right now, what they're asking for is, I think, around 1,600 units.
Sorry, can we just talk in like a hypothetical, about a hypothetical
Right,
senior?
right.
Just because I just feel
So
really
what if
uncomfortable.
1,000 people who
But
happen
Do
to
you-
live
do
in
you ha-
Howard County moved to this hypothetical place, leaving 1,000 houses
There's still more,
empty
but
for
few more.
hypothetical
It depends, maybe.
students?
And Ms. Young.
Jeff,
Hello,
when
Mr.
you,
King.
when a large age-restricted project gets built, do you see a spike in resales or no?
So I
Because
guess
this is a narrative that goes
Okay,
around
and then,
the community,
Mr.
and I don't know the
Burnett, after
answer.
you respond, I want to make sure Ms. Kamen has an opportunity to respond too.
So I guess the way to respond to that question is this Erickson, well, a hypothetical.
No, not that one.
Right,
Like
hypothetical project.
Waverly West or something.
Yeah, Waverly West. So the way, we don't have a model that will predict because there's going to be 1,000 senior units, that therefore is going to free up other homes. We don't have a model to predict that. As part of the projection system, however, the school system does look at trends of resales in neighborhoods. So they track neighborhoods, and they track both apartment turnover and purchase resale units. And the new children coming in from those resales. So if a trend were to develop because of that situation, then we wouldn't know right away what the situation would be, but we would be able to see and track trends and build it into future projections because the model is done annually. Now, also having said that, the Waverly is a good example. That was a relatively large senior project, but most senior projects are not that big.
And
Okay,
so you're
and-
saying that,
But wait, just let
can I
Ms. Kamen.
clarify with Mr. Brono?
Okay, all right.
So you're saying that if you see a trend coming, then you incorporate it, because you could be moving from age-restricted villa to Vantage House or more condo environment from a different age-restricted housing. So, but if
Right.
you see a trend, then you start to incorporate that.
Right, and that's the only thing we can do because I think it's very hard to be predictive. I mean, the other thing is Howard County isn't an island to itself, right? So when senior homes are built and somebody might move into a senior home, those people can come from anywhere in the country,
Right.
not necessarily Howard County. So I don't think it's a definitive answer that just because you have senior units, you're going to free up other housing.
Ms. Kamen?
Hi, good morning, everyone. So to respond to Dr. Wu's question, we would capture something like that in a resale or an apartment turnover or in any one of the housing factors that we have. We're passing out our projection methodology. This is available online if anybody wants to find it. So again, it's a trend. So if we see, we can't specifically nail down if it's because of X, Y, and Z. It's because of a hypothetical senior housing project or new affordable housing units or what have you. But what we do is we collect all of the resales within the attendance areas, all of our attendance areas for 74 schools. We look at our 5-year historical, what's going on in order to try and predict a rate that we could carry out into the future. And we have certain things, it's called the best fit analysis, where sometimes a 2-year average will be a better predictor of our resales versus a 3 or 5-year. In some instances where there's older homes, we are seeing an uptick of that first generation, especially like around the Columbia area. We're seeing a slightly higher every year, but it's not as fast as you would think it's happening, but it is happening. And so that's how we try, in general, to capture students that come in from the many different parts of our projection. And this sheet that I provided you is all of the points of entry that we track our children that are coming to the system. And we update it every year. So every year we'll get a new housing projection from Jeff's office, and then we incorporate that into our projection model. And if there are any changes to the boundaries, we give the new changes based on the board's decision. Jeff provides the information to us in the new attendance areas, and we use portions of a attendance area data analysis to try and predict based on the new attendance area. So if I'm going to use Bryant Woods, for example. Bryant Woods had redistricting in and out of it. So we would use portions of, say, Clemens Crossing information in the past to try and predict the future. We put it back all together after any decisions made. And so to directly answer your question, we wouldn't know specifically if there was an uptick because of a certain development. We just know in general in a specific attendance area that we're seeing slow increases in the numbers of students from a particular, from resales of the entire attendance area.
So, can I follow up?
Well, I know you both want to follow up, so go ahead, Dr. Wu, go ahead, and
So-
then Ms. Wells.
So my question about, for example, you have a senior living around Miller Library, right? So you probably know who are living there. Where are they living before? Maybe they're out of county. Maybe they live in Howard County. They moved there. So can you do a survey to do a comparative study? Say, okay, maybe for example, for the other senior living, you know probably who they will move in, right? And have something, build some model to help us get it to see.
Yeah, I mean, having that
right?
I
So,
think that's a good idea. I mean, having information.
because you don't have a model, right? So
right,
I hope in the future,
right.
if we can build a similar model, that'll help us, right?
The difference between
Ms.
like a
Hanley?
Waverly West and that, though, is that the people that move into Miller's Grant aren't paying property taxes. So there's no way to pull those people,
So
to
my,
track
my
them
question
into
is not a
tax.
property tax. My question is about the,
But that's where
who
that's
will
where you
move
need to
in,
get the
right?
data
Where there
unless.
empty houses in Howard County, right?
Well, how-
Where that new houses were creating new students to the
Yeah,
school system.
and I think the way to do that, you do a survey. So for example, you could do a survey of the people living there and say, where did you come from? If
Right.
80% of the people said, I came from, we were living in Howard County, and we moved to here, then that's good information to be able, and if we were to target exactly where,
Sure.
then that's
But,
even better information.
Yeah, exactly.
To
Just
get
give us
trends,
some
to get
ideas,
trends.
right?
Now, that
Right.
would be, of course, looking back, but it might help us for future large senior developments to see what the trends might be, people moving in, yeah.
Okay,
Our-
Ms. Walsh, and then Ms. Mallon.
On this chart we're all looking at, DPZ provides to the school system the blue box new construction yield, right?
They provide the new construction units. We calculate the student yields from new construction.
Okay. So it's not the blue box, it's the box next to it. DPZ provides to Howard County Public School System the number of arrivals from, no, not even that.
Not arrivals, just they
Number
just
of
give
new
us the
homes.
units. They
Number
just-
of new homes.
Yes.
Okay. Anything else on this chart that DPZ is providing to HCPSS? Everything else is you guys?
Everything else comes from Health Department. I can't remember quite where the sales come from, but there's a download from there. So we have multiple sources of information.
Okay, so number of homes in that year on the resale yield box, none of that's coming from DPC either?
No, it is not
Okay, thank you.
coming from DPZ. It comes from NDP, Maryland Department of Planning.
Just in follow-up to Dr. Wu's suggestion, and you're saying that it's a good idea. I think it's a great idea, partly because anecdotally, my interactions at Miller's Grant have almost exclusively been with people who have said, I was a former teacher in the county, and so they actually have an intergenerational partnership with Blessings in a Backpack for Swansfield, where they're packing our bags for us. And in doing that, almost all of the people who I have talked to and interacted through that have said, I am coming from locally and I know the needs of our community, which is why I'm participating. So I think you really are onto something there, Dr. Wu. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Brownell, how much longer is the presentation? Because I think there are a lot of questions. I don't know.
I do have some details of the projection system, if you want to see it. If you don't want to see it, that's fine, too. But if you want to see, we provide the housing unit projections to the school system and other agencies. That's really what the rest of the presentation is, but,
If you think you can go through it quickly.
okay, I
so
can
that
do
we
it pretty
can-
quickly. Sure,
Okay.
Okay. So this is really to show that our projection model, which is really a GIS, Geographic Information System model, is down to the parcel level. So the yellow is built homes. The light yellow is undeveloped homes that can be either recorded or a building permit gets put on them. We track these as they go through. This is our land use map. It's a detailed land use map down to the parcel level. It's a lot of colors, but really the light yellow are the areas where it has potential residential capacity based on our current land use. So this is what I was alluding to before. There's not a lot of capacity left for residential development in Howard County. Yes.
So quick question, right? So can you go back to the original one? So basically, if you align this with the polygons in the school system, that means we can predict the student population at a polygon level.
And
Is
we
that
do,
right?
and we do that.
It's
So
not an attendance area.
exactly, and
level,
that was kind of the point I was trying to say earlier, and I think there's some confusion about that. It has been for the last several years. Just because our allocation areas, which is the one part of APFO, doesn't align with the school regions, doesn't mean that the projections aren't can't align with the polygons. So they, in the end, they do align with the polygons, and they do align with the projections at all levels, not just elementary district, but middle district and high school district.
So the reason I'm asking this because when we look at a student projection based on attendance area, then attendance area changes over time because when you do redistricting, right? Some
Right.
polygon move in, some moves out. If you predict based on polygon level and with your detailed information, probably that will help us have more refined data and more accurate data in the future. Is that
Yeah, well, I think
a
we do
good
that now.
assessment?
I think we do that now because we do project at the parcel level. If the polygons change or the districts making up the polygons change, the projections can be redone based on the new
Right.
geography.
So based on my information, I think that's not the case, right? We're
Ms.
predicting
Kamen?
based on
okay.
attendance
So,
area level.
If you recall, when cooperative strategies came in June of 2019, they actually recommended against using the polygon level data because you introduce more error. Because if something really, there's a super high growth, it might not be a super high growth after all, after a certain period of time. So you have to be very careful in doing at least school level projections by polygon. The smaller the level, the greater the error, and that was actually identified from cooperative strategies. If you notice, like, you could just even look at the error between elementaries, middle, and high school. High school has a bigger catchment area, and therefore we get less error in the high school. When you move down into elementary school, that's where you'll see our greater error. And so if you go even further down, you can introduce more areas. So just because you have a smaller area doesn't mean your error will go down. You can actually introduce more error at the polygon level, at least for the school projections.
Ms. Catronio.
To speak to the school system and the DPZ speaking the same language, I think what would be really helpful and what I've done for my own use is take it down by school. So every development that's in the allocations list under DPZ, I've reallocated them under schools, by school, and what their polygon number is, and then how many apartments are coming, how many townhouses, how many single-family detached, even MIHU, just to know, because I think that's what the public and what is helpful probably for you guys is to look at it by school. And even, it's not kept fairly updated either. We still have wrong schools listed from the last redistricting in 2018. And so even the allocations that we have currently on the website aren't even aligning, saying they're going to the right school. So right now, under allocations under DPZ, it's by development. It's allocations by planning zone area, whatever. Am I correct? Right,
Mr.
Mr. Brown?
Bronow?
Yeah, well, that's a good point. We do
Right.
do it by allocation area.
Right.
However, we do that by allocation area to sort of communicate how APFO is working. However, we do provide details to the
On
school
the
system
school.
on the school each year. So this is an output of our model, for example, from September 2019. We do it every September.
Where is this located on the website?
This is
'Cause I
not on the
just-
website. This is given to the school system as part of their projection planning.
Okay,
We could
I-
easily put it on the website if people want it on the website.
I think it would-
Yeah.
We want everything on
I-
every website all the time, yes.
Yeah, right.
Transparency,
Okay.
data.
Yeah.
It is a very helpful thing.
And
to
during
those of us who are
redistricting,
in
I would have
decision-making process.
the out years, the projections by the out years, by development, and so that's how was really helpful for me. But also, speaking to APFO, when we have a school that's closed, or region that's closed, I've been looking at other counties' websites and see what they do. They list it by school, and this school is closed, this is the development that's on hold, this is what we're going to do about it, this is the plan for addressing the capacity problems at this school. And I think that's something, I hope that I have examples of it, of what they do, because that's really the point of APFO, right? Is to keep track of that and see what's the plan? It's one thing to have a school, but we
What's
need
the
to know,
county and the
what
board
is our plan between the school system and the county? I think that's the point, and I think if we could maybe have these discussions on how we can improve the communication, improve how we look at our data to make it more useful for us and for the public. I've brought examples, I make copies, but they have like elementary school report, they have the name of the elementary school, the project, what it is, how many, the type of housing, what's coming, and what is our plan? Oh, we have a renovation coming this year. oh, we're allotting this amount for capital plan. So I think that is something that I think we should move towards.
Absolutely. And it was actually something that I personally discussed it when we met.
Yes, we did.
When we talked about the general plan too, just last week. I said, we should be able to say, if we're going to allow this development, then we also need to make sure that the capital funds are available to do a renovation or an
speaking the same
addition.
language.
It's okay to put the development there if we know that there's going to be capacity for the kids who are going to come out of that particular development. And I think that's where some of the disconnect has happened as well, Ms. Catronio, and I hope that as we are working together in the future on creating this next and very critical general plan, because it's
Yeah.
probably, this is going to be it. This is really going to be
Well,
it for
also,
development.
it's what we should be
Yeah.
reporting to the state. I mean, the Maryland Department of Planning is tracking this. They've got, many counties that have APFOs in place, and so they're tracking, like, what is your plan for addressing the closed schools? Because it's not good for it, right? We don't
No.
want to close schools.
we don't.
I mean, I know we do.
No,
There's
well,
not
right.
everybody,
We do and we
but-
don't, right. We
But our
prefer
goal,
not
our
to.
job as a school board is to make sure there's capacity for the kids
Right.
coming. It's not to, close development.
Okay, well,
So.
Ms. Delmont Small.
No, I think this is very important because the issue is that, yes, we look at it by attendance area, but the challenge is the attendance area changes every time we do redistricting. So we are never comparing apples to apples. And I understand the theory that if we do it by polygon, that's too small. But if we have a polygon and we know a development is going in there with 500 single-family units or 500 attached, whatever they are, then we know that impact is going to be huge for that, for whatever attendance area that polygon gets moved to. And the problem is, by the redistricting, is we're moving, for lack of a better term, the large areas, the areas that are having large increases in students coming in, and it's masking the overall problem. We're just pushing the problem out and out and out. So what I would like to see is, when we have these large developments go in, what was our assumption as to what the yield would be by students and what was the actual yield? Because I think that would help inform us moving forward when we do projections.
I know everybody's got a lot of questions, so I just want to make sure that I gather all the questions because, well, the meeting was supposed to be over 5 minutes ago. But if people can stay, I'm willing to keep going because I know that this topic is incredibly important. And I also would like us to prepare, before we leave this meeting, a roadmap going forward, because this topic is too critical. If there's anything that we could really try and plan for in the future as a joint board and county council, this is it. This is something that we really can take a hold of and be a part of, trying to work with DPZ and with Ms. Kamen to find maybe not the solution, but at least a path forward that will make things a little less exciting in the county when it comes to overcapacity schools. And so I want us to think about, before we leave this meeting, how we're going to go forward. But I also want people to make sure that they have their opportunity to ask questions. Did anybody have more questions or comments? Ms. Catronio.
Just one more, because I won't be able to stay, unfortunately, if there's more discussion, but to make sure that we, part of that roadmap may be to look at projections from apartments and from multifamily housing and to update that, or to look at updating our projections, looking
What
at
are those?
projection.
Do we know what they are? Because that was on my list. Like, what are we using for a detached home, townhouse?
But also
apartment?
just to look at checking our work and looking back at what we've done, the developments that have come in and how many students have actually come out of there, evaluating that and seeing how, because we have different types of multifamily housing coming down the pike. And that's mostly what we're building now. So it's important to be accurate. So
Well,
that could be part of the roadmap.
I do want to include, though, that multifamily housing is restricted to 24% or 23% of our total residential zones. So it's less than a quarter of that. And what we did absolutely see during the CB 42 work is that more students are coming from single-family detached. And part of that reason is because you have a mix of units, so you're not going to have, 2 children in a studio apartment, most likely. But we are, I'm all about checking our work, but I think that we are starting to build that in, at least on the county side. And Mr. Bronow has given us very good, sort of doing that look back and looking at the three bedrooms versus 2 bedrooms versus 1 bedroom.
Versus
But-
garden versus high-rise versus.
Right. And when I've brought that up with Mr. Bronow before, he's talked about the challenge of projecting, and maybe you could touch on this, but the challenge of projecting by unit when, at the different stages, because we even see it when we wear our other hats in the zoning board, it's like, these are the units, but they don't know the mix yet, they can't tell us the mix yet, so, and that obviously has a big impact.
Right, yeah, that's a good point. So we don't know apartment, or numbers of bedrooms at this point. So, in other words, when a subdivision comes in or a site plan comes in, it has a number of apartment units, but it doesn't have the information of the number of units. Oftentimes, I'm not sure the architectural rendering is even done. It's not until they submit the building plans to the Department of Inspections, Licenses, and Permits do they actually have a design, and they say, okay, this building's going to have 23 bedrooms, 52 bedrooms, 101 bedroom studios. But having said that, and Renee can touch on this more, so the yields that are used, they are yields for new construction, and they vary by location. So they're not countywide. They vary by location, by school district, I believe, and based on historical yield. So for example, in downtown Columbia, we know that the yields, that those units that are being built in downtown Columbia are very low.
So far.
Right, but we
They
also
still
know,
are.
looking at that most of the units in downtown Columbia, the ones that are Juniper and the other one that's going to open up, there's a lot of studios in 1 bedrooms, 80% studios in 1 bedrooms. And that's why the Metropolitan and 10M flats, 10M and M flats are generating a lot of children, because there's not a lot of 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms. I think Juniper might have a little higher ratio of 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, but in general, and it's also the type of people that those types of units are attracting. It's empty nesters and millennials, people without children at this point. That doesn't mean that it can't happen. But that's opposed to garden apartments, which generate a lot higher level of, for families. And so the yields do vary by geography and are built into the model.
I would like to see us figure out a way. I mean, it could change plus or minus whatever percent over time, but, an apartment building is, the economics are priced out. I would imagine when it comes in, they've got some sense of whether, how many 3 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 1 bedrooms. We can probably try to figure out how to build that into the process so you're getting those numbers faster, because you're right. The difference between a studio 1 bedroom and a 3 bedroom's going to be night and day. And then you multiply that by 200 units in a building, you can be way off.
So let me suggest
And
this,
how
because
long it takes to lease up
we
and
are,
everything.
And
we
they
are
come
really,
fast, right?
Well, but
people
they
have to
do pay
leave.
for 18 months,
Okay.
yeah.
So I do sort of want to bring this to I say a most unfortunate end, because I think that this has been an incredibly valuable conversation for us to have, and appreciate the information that Mr. Bronow and Ms. Kamen has shared with us, and the questions, the really good questions that people have asked in this meeting today. I don't know how you feel, Chair Ellis, but I would like to see this as the number one thing on our agenda, and maybe the only thing on our agenda for the next meeting. Well, we will have to talk about the budget. But other than that, yes, I would like us to continue this discussion, because we will be in the general plan phase now for the next year and a half, determining what we're going to do with the new general plan. And I think I would like us all to consider, what can we do as a group together in open sessions? Where could we meet, maybe 2 by 2, so that we can discuss some ideas that we can bring back to the group, so that we can, because we can't all gather, of course, every week or, even every month.
What about
but
little working committees or something?
Little
where
working-
Maybe we're tasked with specific things.
A little working committee, I think, would be,
The 2% like to talk about. Yeah, not a
Yeah,
committee.
I
The
think
two
we
people that
technically
are talking
can't.
about.
Yeah.
No, two
No
people.
minutes,
Right,
okay.
two people that are talking about a particular area.
right, yes. So we can take that, maybe discuss that further, and talk about how we can move forward to make sure that everybody's ideas get the light of day, and we can see, are these ideas doable? Is
Right.
this something, like Dr. Wu's idea today was something that you said, oh, that's doable, that's an idea.
Well, I didn't say it was
That's-
doable, I said it was
Well,
a
you
good
didn't say it was
idea.
doable, okay, that is
Yeah,
true. I put
surveys
words
take
in
a
your
lot of
mouth.
resources,
Yeah,
and,
yes,
Can I
yes.
add one thing to say? I think it's an excellent suggestion in terms of, again, tying it to the general plan. That might be a perfect opportunity, and I just wanted to convey that we have time to do this, and I have a few
do.
slides at the end. We have some new information that is sort of leading indicators of how development is coming into the county, and it's slowing dramatically. So I don't know if you want to talk about that or not, because I have two slides that show that. I guess what I'm saying is that there's a lot, there's some in the pipeline, but development is slowing down to such an extent that doing this in the general plan timeframe works.
Okay, good. Ms.
Mr.
King.
Youngman, actually, in response to an MPIA request, we have all of our yields up. It's 2020-341. It's for new house, I believe it was new housing construction yield, resale, and I think apartment turnover. It's a massive spreadsheet, and it has all the yields that are generated based on the historical
And I'm sure you'd love
information.
to send it to us.
I can send it to you. It is online if anybody wants to kind of get a sneak preview. It's on
You
our
just send
MPI
us the
website.
link. It will be as pretty as this?
No, it won't be. It's an Excel spreadsheet
actually
with
very
thousands of cells.
Good.
Okay, Ms. Rigby?
I just wanted to say, I didn't want to push it this meeting because I know that a lot of the sports teams had reached out, but on our January meeting, we had talked about getting back to some of the discrepancies regarding PTA fundraising and discrepancies within sort of the, all of the funds that surround the schools that don't necessarily flow through our budget. So I think we all recognize that we all have a lot to say when we're with each other. So keeping it to sort of 2-3 agenda items is probably more beneficial, as we've learned over the last few years. But I did want to make sure that we
Get that back on.
get that back on.
Okay,
Madam Chair,
yes.
this discussion, I agree, this is the main thing that happens between our bodies at a high level, and probably the thing that's most broken and most frustrating to the community. Because we have housing allocations on this month, we have CB1 on this month, and we do have a lot of other bills that we don't have the luxury of pushing out because of budget. Should we add a work session to handle just sort of the school-related type things so we can kind of continue this discussion, but also in the context of those bills, rather than, it's always hard for us to get everything into a work session. That's all. I'm just going to throw that out.
Okay, we'll consider that. Maybe we'll get a sneak peek at the end of your.
And you wouldn't need like the whole Board of Ed or anything. You'd mostly
Right.
need,
And anybody who could come, could
Yeah.
come. Yeah, all right. All right. Thank you all very much. This has been the start of yes, Ms. Schwartz-Jones. This has been the start of an incredibly productive conversation. We appreciate so much this ability to get together with the school board and discuss these various items. Again, thank you to the school personnel who came today and helped us understand this process better. And thank you to the members of the Howard County government who also came today, Mr. Brownell in particular, for your PowerPoint here that I know that you will send us, but we will probably be asking you follow-up questions, and we appreciate it. We really do. Thank you, everybody. And this meeting is adjourned. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, that's right. Yes.
you go through your last two slides.
Yes. Okay. All right. Okay.